He rode in just before dusk, tall, silent, hair braided tight, wind-stripped and shadowed by the dying sun. He didn't ask permission when he stepped onto her porch. Didn't speak until he'd set the leather-wrapped bundle down at her feet. It wasn't a weapon. It was a baby, wrapped in deer hide, face red from the cold, barely whimpering. The woman looked up from her rocking chair, confused, not frightened, not yet.
De mens eyes met hers.
I go where they won't follow, he said. And then, softer, barely a breath. You know how to keep a baby alive. She didn't answer. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode into the wild without looking back. But let's go back. To before the porch. Before the baby. Before the whisper that changed everything. To a different kind of silence. The kind that had filled Ada Whitmore's house for 6 long years. The town of Dry Creek was not kind to women alone. Not unkind either, just forgetful. Men tipped their hats and kept walking. Women nodded politely, then crossed the street. Everyone remembered her husband's accident, and how the child she'd carried afterward hadn't made it past its first night. Some whispered she'd gone quiet from grief. Others said she liked the loneliness. But in truth, Ada simply didn't know how to rejoin a world that had already replaced her. She lived in a narrow house on the edge of the prairie, near where the grass grew wild and the wind made music of the dry stalks. Her hands were calloused from work, her lips chapped from wind, and her eyes had stopped looking for anything beyond sunrise and sleep. But her heart, though tired, still knew how to ache, especially when she passed the cradle gathering dust in the attic. Especially when the milk came, sometimes even though it shouldn't anymore. Ghost milk, the midwife had called it. Her body remembering a child it never got to keep. So when the Apache rode up that evening and placed a child at her feet, Ada didn't cry, didn't scream. She simply stood, lifted the infant carefully into her arms, and carried it inside. The child was thin, not sick, just untouched. Eyes barely open, mouth searching instinctively. Her fingers unwrapped the leather to check his limbs, whole. His toes curled at the cold, and he made a soft, choking whimper. He was no more than 3 months old. She didn't ask whose he was. Didn't think about why the man had chosen her. She only knew one thing. No child gets left alone at night. For days she stayed inside, feeding, rocking, warming small clothes in front of the fire and trimming the frayed edges of an old blanket to wrap around him. When the baby cried, she whispered old lullabies she'd never thought she'd use again. When he coughed, she boiled yarrow and sage, just like her mother had. At first, the town assumed she was ill. Then someone spotted the smoke from her chimney burning at odd hours. A boy delivering mail claimed he heard a baby's cry. And by the week's end, the preacher's wife came knocking. I heard a sound, she said, eyes narrowing. Ada stood in the doorway, body half blocking the warm room behind her. Must have been the wind. The woman didn't believe her, but she didn't press. That was the thing about Ada. People never quite knew how far they could push her. Even grief has teeth when it learns to survive alone. By the 10th day, the baby had a name. Not one she spoke aloud. Not yet. But in her chest, when she looked at him, the name sat quiet and certain. Samuel. She called him that when no one was listening. Drink, Samuel. Hush now, Samuel. You came from silence, baby boy. But you're not made for it. Then, one morning, 12 days after he arrived, Ada found a single arrow stuck upright in the soil near her porch. No note, no blood, just a warning. The wind shifted that night, and she knew someone had come looking. Not the warrior, someone else. By morning, the arrow was gone. Ada hadn't removed it. She'd left it there all night, stuck in the frozen soil like a message in a language she couldn't read. But when she opened the door at sunrise, it was no longer there. No footsteps, no sound, just wind. Inside, the baby slept against her chest, warm in a sling she'd fashioned from her husband's old shirt. He'd begun to smile in his sleep, little twitching corners of his lips, as if dreaming of something soft, or someone he'd known before the cold. Ada kissed his forehead, then closed the door and bolted it behind her. By noon, The rumors had reached town square. She's hiding something. Ada Whitmore? The widow. Preacher's boy swears he heard a baby. Whose? Could be Apache. That word stuck. Apache. Whispered in corners, spat behind closed doors, dragged through the mud by men who'd never met one, never seen one, but swore they'd lost something to them all the same. It didn't take long for Marshall Keating to show up. Not at her door, not yet, but close. He stood at the end of her fence line that afternoon, his hat low, one hand resting on his belt buckle. "Ma'am," he called. Ada didn't come out, didn't respond. She just stood in the window, the baby pressed to her chest beneath a blanket, and watched him watching her. He waited 5 minutes, then tipped his hat and walked off. But she knew it wasn't over. That night she packed a satchel. Not because she planned to run, because if someone forced her hand, she wanted to know where her hands would go. Inside, a knife, a small pouch of silver coins, jerky wrapped in cloth, an extra blanket, 2 nursing cloths. She didn't pray, didn't cry, just folded everything neat and tucked it beneath the floorboard near the hearth. Then she sat beside the fire and watched the baby breathe. "Your people didn't leave you behind," she whispered. "They left you with me." The next day, the preacher's wife came again. But this time she didn't knock. She walked straight in, didn't smile, didn't ask permission, just stood there in the doorway, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. "What's his name?" she asked. Ada didn't move. "Whose child is that?" Ada didn't flinch. "You're nursing him," the woman said sharply. "You're feeding a stranger's baby, and from what I hear, that stranger was an Apache." Still, Ada said nothing. The woman stepped closer. "What are you doing, Ada?" And finally, quietly, she answered, "I'm doing what no one else did." The woman's mouth parted, but no words came. Just judgment, heavy and trembling. She turned and left without another word. By sundown, Marshall Keating was back. This time with 2 men. One held a rifle. The other carried a folded piece of paper, an arrest notice. Ada didn't open the door. She stepped onto the porch, the baby cradled tight in her arms, and stood between them and her home. "Ma'am," Keating said gently, "I ain't here to take the child, but folks are uneasy. They think you've taken up sheltering." He paused, couldn't finish it, so she did. "Indians?" He sighed. "I just want to know who he is." "I don't," she said plainly. "You're saying you don't know where he came from?" "I know he was cold, hungry, and needed milk. That ain't the question. It's the only one I answered." The man with the rifle shifted. Keating raised a hand. "Look," he said, softening. "You're a widow. You're grieving. Maybe you're confused." But Ada stepped forward. 1 step. The baby stirred but didn't cry. "I nursed my own child," she said, "for 2 nights. He died before the 3rd. Do you think I don't know the difference between confusion and clarity?" Keating blinked. "I know what grief is," she said, "and I know what life feels like when it stirs on your chest like a bird too small to fly." She stepped down off the porch. "Now close. If you came here to take him," she said, "you'll have to tell this child why he's cold again, why he's hungry again, why he's motherless again." The wind caught her hair, swept it back. "I won't explain it for you." Keating swallowed. His boots shifted. Then he turned. "Let's go," he muttered. The men hesitated, but followed, and Ada didn't move until they'd passed the edge of her land. That night, she kept a rifle near the bed. The baby slept soundly, but her eyes never closed. 2 days later, a man knocked at midnight. Not Marshall Keating, not a neighbor. She didn't know how she knew that. She just did. The knock was too light, too patient, like whoever stood out there didn't mind waiting all night. Ada rose slowly from her bed, rifle in hand, baby still wrapped warm beside her. She cracked the door but didn't open it. A shape stood at the edge of her porch, lean and tall. Moonlight caught the glint of bone beads tied into his braids. No movement, no voice. She whispered, "If you're here to take him, don't." Silence. Then, finally, the shape stepped forward. The man's eyes caught the light. but not like an intruder, like someone who already knew what was inside. "I'm not here to take him," he said. His voice was quiet, worn. "I'm here to see if he's alive." She let him in, not because she trusted him, but because her gut, that stubborn, grieving mother's gut, told her he already belonged in the story. Maybe even before she did. He stepped inside and lowered his head as he passed through the door. He didn't reach for the child, just stood there in the glow of the fire and watched him breathe. Ada held Samuel tighter. "You knew him?" she asked. The man nodded once. "My brother's son." Her breath caught. "What happened?" "His mother died after the birth. Snakebite. Father went missing 3 weeks later. We think he was caught in the pass. Snow buried him." Ada glanced down at the baby's face. It twitched, and his mouth puckered softly in sleep. "He was left at my porch," she said. "Just like that. I left him." She turned sharply, but the man wasn't ashamed. "I had men tracking me," he said. "Cavalry. I couldn't carry a child through the canyon. He would have died." "You assumed I'd take him?" "No. You gambled." "Yes." She stared at him. Firelight made shadows dance along his jawline. "How long were you watching?" 3 nights. From the ridge. "You could have come back sooner. I needed to see if you'd love him." Ada blinked. That hit something deep. "You needed to see if he mattered to me?" He finally looked at her. Fully. "No. I needed to see if he mattered to you more than where he came from." They sat by the fire as the wind howled outside. He told her his name was Tatsi. It meant swift wind in his grandfather's tongue. He said he wasn't full Apache, but raised by them after his mother died and his white father traded him for a horse. "I thought if I lived like a ghost, I'd never get hurt," he said. "But then I saw that boy in the snow and knew ghosts don't have children." Ada watched the child stir beside her. "You want him now?" Tatsi looked pained. "Yes." And then, with a breath, "But only if he's still a stranger to you." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she rose and walked to the crib she'd carved from old pine. Carefully, she laid the baby down, then turned back to him. "When he wakes up hungry, I know the rhythm of his cry." Tatsi nodded. "I know the mark on his chest. 3 freckles in a line like a constellation. I know he kicks his left leg more than the right. I know he reaches for warmth in his sleep." Ada stepped closer. "I know his breath sounds like my son's. And sometimes I forget which child I'm holding." Tatsi swallowed hard. The fire popped between them. He knelt on one knee, slow, steady, and bowed his head. "I won't take him if he's already found a mother." She didn't move. Then, after a moment, walked to the child, lifted him gently. The baby stirred, fussed, then quieted as soon as he touched her chest. Tatsi rose and came closer, gazed at the small bundle. Then, with no warning, he lowered his head to the boy's ear and whispered, "Mother," not to Ada, to the child, as if naming the bond that already lived in his bones. Ada didn't speak. She just tightened her arms around the baby and stared at the warrior who hadn't come to reclaim anything, only to witness what had taken root in his absence. But outside, someone else had witnessed it too. A shadow under the trees. A voice that would speak by morning. A man who'd followed the stranger through the pass and carried more than questions in his saddlebag. The stranger didn't leave that night. He stayed in the barn. Not because he feared the cold, he'd spent half his life sleeping under stars and snow, but because something about the house felt sacred now. As if stepping across the threshold too many times would undo whatever had settled into place. Ada made up the cot with hay and blankets. She didn't speak much as she handed them over, but he caught the way her fingers lingered on the fabric, the way she watched him as he placed the blanket down like it was something fragile. "She dreams about him," he said once, not looking up. "Who?" "The child's mother. My sister-in-law. I see her sometimes when the fire's low. Her eyes follow me when I ride. I think she wants to know if I did right by him." Ada's hand stopped at the edge of the doorframe. "He's warm now," she said softly, "and fed. That's more than most mothers ever get to hope for when they die." They fell into a rhythm. The 3 of them, Tatsi didn't intrude. He fetched water, hunted game, chopped wood without being asked. At night, he'd sit near the hearth, just close enough to feel the heat, just far enough not to disturb. And Ada, she softened. Not all at once, but in pieces. She began asking questions. Not about his past, not yet, but about the baby's kin. What his name had been before. If his father was kind. If his mother had sung. She sang every night, Tatsi said, even when the wind tried to drown her out. What was the song? He hummed it, low and broken, like someone trying to remember their own heartbeat. The melody was unfamiliar, but something in it made Ada's eyes sting. She used to hold him tight against her chest, he whispered, like she was afraid the world might take him if she blinked too long. Ada didn't respond, but her hand moved gently over the baby's cheek, like muscle memory. Later, after the baby had fallen asleep, Ada handed Tatsi a carved figure, a simple wooden rabbit, worn smooth from time and fingers. He reaches for it when he's tired, she said, or when he wants to be held. Tatsi turned it over in his hands. You made this. My husband did. For our son. His fingers paused. You lost one. She nodded. Tatsi said nothing, just handed the rabbit back. But she didn't take it. Keep it, she said. If you stay, he'll know it means you loved him too. There was a long silence. Then Tatsi looked at her, really looked, and in a voice quieter than before. Do you believe a child can have two mothers? Ada's breath caught. She wasn't sure if it was the question, or the way he said mothers. I believe a child can have whatever love the world gives him, and he's already been given more than most. Tatsi didn't reply, but his eyes shimmered in the firelight. The next morning, a gunshot cracked the quiet. Ada jerked awake, the baby still tucked against her side. Another shot closer. She threw the blanket off and ran barefoot to the door. Tatsi was already moving through the snow, bow drawn, low to the ground. At the edge of the property stood a man, white, lean, long coat, rifle slung over one shoulder and a smirk drawn thin across his lips. Thought I'd see what the rumors were about, he called. Tatsi didn't speak, didn't move. Ada stepped up behind him, breath visible in the cold air. That your baby? The man asked. Does it matter? She answered. Depends. Folks in town seem to think you're hiding something. An Apache baby, fed on white woman's milk. That don't sit right with them. Tatsi took a single step forward. The man raised his hands, laughing. Relax. I ain't here for a fight. Then leave, Ada said. He glanced at Tatsi, then at the house, then back to Ada. I reckon I'll let the town know what I saw. And what was that? She asked. He smiled. A child with two parents who don't match, but do just fine. Then tipped his hat and walked off. That night, Ada wept, not out of fear, but because she realized, for the first time in years, she was no longer alone in a house that echoed with loss. The echoes had been replaced by breath, by footsteps, by lullabies in two languages, and by a child who now reached for both of them with the same trust. Spring came late that year, the kind of spring where the snow melts slow and quiet, like it's afraid of waking up the past. But the thaw came all the same, soaking the earth, greening the hills, loosening what had once been held in place by frost and grief. Tatsi didn't leave. At first, he said he'd stay just until the roads cleared. Then he offered to fix the gate, rebuild the barn wall. Before either of them knew it, he had built a cradle out of juniper wood and carved a turtle into its headboard, a symbol of protection in his mother's tribe. Ada didn't ask when he was leaving anymore. She only set 3 plates on the table each night. One for her, one for him, one for the boy who now sat upright, sturdy-legged, eyes dark and curious, gripping everything he could reach. Samuel, though sometimes Tatsi called him Queso, which meant he laughs in Apache. The boy answered to both. One afternoon, Ada stood on the porch, basket of laundry under one arm, and watched them near the stream. Father and son, or uncle and nephew, or maybe something else entirely. Queso was crawling now, his little fists splashing the edge of the water while Tatsi hovered close by, letting him explore, but always ready to catch. Ada smiled without meaning to, not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't, because life had not given her what she wanted, but it had handed her something unexpected in return. Word spread in town. Some called it indecent. Others whispered about miscegenation and wild blood. But Marshall Keating, the same man who once stood on her porch with a warrant, came by one day with a sack of flour and a quiet apology in his eyes. He didn't ask to come inside, just left the bag on the steps and said, "If anyone asks, tell them I didn't see anything worth worrying over." Ada nodded. That was enough. One night, after a storm had blown the roof shingles loose and left the house damp and smoky, Totsie found her staring into the fire, silent. She didn't turn when he entered, just said, "I never asked you to stay." "I know. But you did." "I know." She finally looked at him. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, bent beside the hearth, and placed something in her palm. A woven cord, Apache style, worn but intact. "This was my mother's," he said. "I've carried it for years." She ran her thumb across the pattern. Red, brown, white. "I thought it might belong to someone else now." Ada looked up, and in that moment, nothing grand, nothing loud, a life shifted quietly into place. Years later, when the boy was old enough to ask questions, he came across an old photograph tucked into the side of a book, a grainy picture of a woman standing alone beside a porch, arms crossed, unsmiling. "Who's this?" Ada looked at it a long while. "That's me," she said. "You don't look like you." "I didn't know who I was yet." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She ruffled his hair and whispered, "I hadn't met you yet." The child grew, not torn between names, but blessed by them. Samuel at school, Queso when he laughed. Both names whispered with love. Both names carrying the echo of a man who rode away once, trusting a stranger to save a child, and of a woman who opened her door to something she never expected and never let go again.